Just really quickly typing something up in the Discord. But I'm going to have some guests today to help me go through the topic of coupling and what it's all about in strategy game design. We're going to learn all about it today. It's going to be very useful and informative for all you strategy game designers out there. And maybe most important of all, it might be inspiring. To me, a lot of times, that's the best thing about... I actually think that's the real purpose of strategy game design to some extent. Theory is inspiration. Like reading other game design books, or even my own, like I get inspired to do game design when I think about game design theory. Which isn't to say it's not useful on its merits, but just to say that there is also another component of it that I think is also pretty significant. So I'm going to call in Steven, and then I'm also going to call in Bricksparts into the stream. Steven's here, good. Clockwork Game Design Debate, Herbivore says. I don't know if this is going to be much of a debate. I hope that we have some... Oh, wait for an advertisement. I hope that we have some disagreement. I suspect there's this question. There might be some disagreement, but... yeah. I'm going to call Steven in now. He's all ready. And we're going to have also Bricksparts come on. We're gonna have Bricksparts on, and assuming he shows up at some point. All right, so I'm gonna pop out this here. Got Steven on the line. Everyone's favorite angry game design theorist. Even angrier than me, maybe.
Hello. Hi. I can't quite hear you on the call yet.
Oh, okay. 1 second. Let me fix that. Actually, it should...
wait, no, I can hear you. I've got you on mute on stream. I can hear your voice.
Good. Okay, good. All good. Hey, how's it going, Steven?
It's going pretty good. I'm just going to minimize that, because seeing you be really out of sync with your voice is freaking me out.
Yes,
I'm doing well. I rushed home from work. I was very excited to talk to you about coupling.
Oh, awesome. Yay. Cool. Well, let's just get into it. I mean, I kind of want to start, like, so first of all, I don't remember who it was that introduced the phrase or the word coupling to me, because it was like after I wrote my second book. I feel like it was that guy Ev Zayer who brought it up to me, but I'm not sure. It might have been you.
I have a reasonable suspicion that it might have been me. If you Google coupling and game design together, the first thing that comes up is my article from 2016, which I wrote like a couple of years after I started talking about it.
I do remember that article.
So that's my little... I'm not sure that it was me, but I like to think that it was me, so I can have a little bit of pride and oh, I introduced the concept there. Maybe after I'm gone, people will still use coupling in a game design context.
Yeah, and you took that from... That's a programming term, computer science term,
right? It's from software design, yeah. It's actually from all kinds of design, design generally, but I learned it from software design.
Okay, so tell me, I guess let's just skip...
You can start by defining it, right?
Yeah, define it, yeah.
Okay, I can do that.
Sure.
I'm reasonably used to it. Coupling is, broadly speaking, a measurement of the degree of connectedness in a system. That is to say, you have a system and it contains multiple elements. The number of times and the strength of the connections between those elements is the amount of coupling in your system. This is most typically used in object-oriented programming. You have classes, which you're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
If you have one class that references another class and maybe calls some functions off that class or messes with the internals of another class, those classes are said to be coupled. And in software design, this is considered a bad thing because when you think about the class that you're working on, you don't want to have to think about 5 or 6 other classes which are coupled to it.
What is the opposite of coupling in that context? Is there Is it like modular or
I would
something?
say we would probably call it encapsulation or
Okay,
separation of concerns,
got it.
right? Or typically in solid, sorry, I'm going into programming gibberish speak now. There's a thing called the single responsibility principle, which says when you have a class, it should be responsible for one thing and one thing only.
Okay,
And it shouldn't be talking to a bunch of other objects and classes that do other things because it makes it so complicated. It's impossible to reason about any part of the program because
sure.
programs are already so complicated.
Yeah.
In a game design context for coupling, uh, it's generally easier to understand. Anytime two systems are connected, you have coupling. My favorite example, and I don't want to go specific with a game right away, but in Puzzle Strike, there's the combine chip. And in the second edition, Serlin added a rule which says whenever you play a combine, it costs money, which
Yeah.
like connected the damage system of the game, which is all about combines and crash gems, to the money system of the game. And those two systems, when they became coupled, like immediately the game is way better because it's much harder to decide like, do I combine this turn? Because normally you would just combine every turn, but now it's like, okay, I have to think about this.
Yeah, yeah. So that's really good. This matches my understanding of what coupling is. And I guess like as you were describing the Puzzle Strike example, which to me is a very good example of like because we have this first edition where it didn't have that rule, and then we have the second edition where it does add this rule, literally linking these two systems together that were not linked before. And but the way you describe your take up from that is that's good because it's coupled. And like I kind of agree with that, but I also feel like it's a specific coupling that makes sense, right? Like there could be
Yeah,
bad couplings, right?
absolutely.
Okay.
Let me clarify my take on this a little. Um, the reason coupling is good, the thing that is good about it is it creates ambiguity because it forces you to compare incomparable things, such as crash power and economic power in Puzzle Strike. Or more generally, let me return to the programming example. Um, the reason coupling is bad in programming is it forces you to think about your whole program, if the whole
Mm,
program is highly coupled, uh, holistically as a complete system. And that is the absolute opposite of what you want as a programmer. You want to be thinking about things separately as individual little pieces, the smallest part you can think about. Um, in game design, we want the player to be thinking holistically about the system. We
yeah.
want them to be not solving a bunch of individual puzzles, but instead applying heuristic, kind of fuzzy reasoning based on their best understanding. Obviously, that's a horrible thing for a programmer. You don't want to be
Yeah.
going like, well, I don't know what this does. Let me try some experiments.
Right.
But for a game, it's wonderful. So the
Yeah.
reason coupling is good is that it creates ambiguity. Uh, but that doesn't mean that always more coupling is better
Right.
or that the specific type of coupling is always good. Obvious examples, if you had a game that was already really highly coupled, adding more is not going to give you a lot. Like it's even more ambiguity. I already don't know what to do.
Mm.
Or
A game can
it
be
could have
too
a bunch.
ambiguous.
Yeah, or it could just add a bunch of negative side effects, right?
Hmm.
Like, oh, this coupling is good because it's more ambiguity, but man, does it add a lot of calculation? Or
Yeah.
boy, does that make this random? Or it's just tedious to have to think about this, or it's too much cognitive load. I can't hold the whole game state in my head anymore,
Hmm.
or whatever, right? There's plenty of ways in which it could be bad. However, the last thing I'll say is I think our current like mode of game design, our current paradigm is that there's so little coupling in
Hmm.
systems that are already not very complicated that basically if you just add a ton of coupling to any game, it's generally going to be an improvement just because of where we are on the spectrum from like not enough to too much. Almost everybody is on the not enough side right now.
Exactly. At least in video game design. I think in tabletop there is a better, like more usually there's more of a healthy couplingness. Maybe tabletop games have other problems too, but like this actually my experience with tabletop games is sort of what, and I mean Puzzle Strike is an example of that, but like is sort of what like helped me to see this about video games, the fact that they're lacking in coupling so much. So some of this like there should be more coupling messaging is really a reaction to the current status quo in video game design, where, as you say, it is very like, uncoupled. And I actually wonder, when you're talking about programming and the very good reasons for why programming is, you're told to not use coupling, I wonder if that actually has influenced game design at all, because a lot of the game designers were just trained programmers, right? It's quite possible that may have influenced that. I've never thought of that before until just now when you were talking about
I
this.
haven't thought about it either, actually. I'm not so sure if it's necessarily from the same training. Maybe it comes from structure. Like, okay, I have these two game design systems, and how am I going to implement them? Well, I'll have a class for one and a class for the other. And what do I want to do with those classes? Well, ideally, I want to lock them in different rooms, and never the two shall communicate or meet.
Yeah.
And maybe they communicate via some kind of message system through like an intermediate third party, so they're as decoupled as possible. And that's the structure of the program. But in a sense, the structure of the program defines the structure of the game, right? So it kind of, maybe it bleeds through into the design. Like, oh yeah, I have to separate these things. Well, wait, they're supposed to be like intimately connected. Yeah, but that's hard to code. Oh, all right. I guess let's make a bad game with no coupling.
Yeah, and do you find also that, like, because yourself as a programmer, when you're thinking about strategy game design or working on your own strategy game designs, that you actually end up making more coupled code as well, or not? Because, like, I could say for me, like, Gem Wizard's code is extremely coupled and like very hard to work through, and there are a lot of bugs for that reason and others. But I wonder if that's at all, if you experience that at all as well.
Uh, I don't think that I do. I will say that the thing that I experience a lot, and I notice myself doing it since you pointed it out, is sometimes I'll think of a game design system that's nice and highly coupled, and I think, oh, that'll be really fun. And then I go, but that'll be really hard to program. And then I kind of go, I am torn a little. I have this
Yeah.
conflict of like, do the thing and have a really fun, good time as a designer, or don't do it and have a much happier time as a programmer. And that is a problem for me.
Yeah, I mean
But I
that's
don't know
yeah.
if it necessarily means more coupled code.
Right. No, I don't think so either. But I do wonder if, like, if you, when you're entering into more coupling thought, uh, like, or actually one example is like, you'll be working on the code for one ability or something, and that ability, like, for example, if you were to do this, like, let's say you were working on the digital version of Puzzle Strike, and then there was this -1, that would be a new interaction that the combine, like, skill or whatever now has access to the money system. And so, like, you're inherently, because the rules are becoming more coupled, like, you have to, like, restructure everything if you want to avoid coupling when you add a rule like this, right? And in my experience, strategy game design is very iterative. Like, it's like this kind of shit all over the place, right? You're like constantly like, oh my god, we should do blankety blank, some huge new systemic change, and that makes the game much better. And now it's like, oh well, we could redo all the code, or we could just literally put in like a pointer from the combine class so that it can actually directly impact the money. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you mean. This is true of programming. The easiest way to do it is usually the more highly coupled way, which will be the first thing. But eventually,
Mm-hmm.
as you add more and more of that, you get to a point where it's like, okay, we can't add any more things because it's literally impossible to work on this code base unless you invest the effort in paring down from that.
Yeah. So yeah, any other things you want to say about your definition of coding, coupling rather, before I bring in Bricksparts?
No, I think we've covered all of it. Like, we talked about what it is, we've talked about why I think it's good, and the caveats as to when it might not be good. I think I said everything I wanted to say.
Yeah, it's not like a huge, super controversial topic, I don't think. Let's get Brickparts in here, who has another somewhat related topic. Uh, Bricksparts. I call them in. Uh, and yeah, Bricksparts, you can do video or voice, up to you. No pressure to do video. I know everyone's not set up for that necessarily. Um,
Hello.
Hello, I hear you.
Uh, is Steven there?
Yes, he is. Oh, wait, maybe he's not. Oh, I think I lost Steven. Let me call him in now.
Okay.
Plus, add a person. No. Right button. How do I do this? I feel like I forget how to do this every single time. Add friends to DM. What the heck? Oh, I'm not a friend with you. I have to become your friend. That's the problem. Uh, yeah.
Cool.
So I sent you a friend request on Discord. If you could let me know
Yep.
when
Yep. Yep.
you
I
got that.
accepted it.
Cool. All right, so now I can add Steven to this. Okay, group DM. Friend request failed. What? Hold on, let me restart this call. I'll be right back.
All right.
Okay, let's try this one more time. Hello again. Sorry about that, Steven.
Hi, hello.
Hello. I'm trying to figure out this this stupid thing.
Yeah, you should be able
Bricks.
to invite Bricks to this chat, right?
Yeah, should be able to. Okay, trying now.
We
Mess
need a
this up.
little Gem Wizards themed technical difficulties banner to put up.
That's a good idea with some music, some little bossa tune. Um, I think I've added them in.
Hi, Tribound. I see TB in the chat.
Blah 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 blah. Where's the goddamn? We create a group chat, and then definitely worked last time. Boom. Create group DM. Okay. Aha!
Hey!
I think I got it.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. All right, let's pull this out here. There we go. Boom. All good. Okay. Hello, Bricksparts. Welcome to the stream.
Hello. Of course, I get here right as soon as you guys finish up the coupling definition part.
Well, this is a coupling definition. You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's fair.
I would like to hear. So now, first of all, does this match your conception of it, or like, because I know you've been asking for a while about you wanted more clarification on it. Do you still feel that way?
Are you sharing your screen in the call, or do I need to like run the stream on the side? Because I can see the coupling document.
I'm not sharing my stream on the call.
Okay.
No.
Let me start the stream and like just mute it.
Sure.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So I definitely understand like the general idea of it's about connecting different systems of the system. Or I mean, in a sense, it almost seems like it's kind of the basis of like just a systemic game in general.
Yes.
I don't know. I think like maybe what would help me a lot is having some more specific examples of
Okay,
like
that's a good
what
example.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, more examples. Let's do that. That's a really good idea. So let's see. It's kind of hard to think of them in video games sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. We don't have to do it right now. I don't know if there's any specific things that come to mind or.
I could probably list some. I started work on another coupling article. I figured it's
Oh,
been 4 years.
okay.
Nice.
And I was trying to break it down into various different types. I've talked about the patrol zone in Codex, which I think is really great as an example. It connects the so Codex is kind of like Magic the Gathering. What it does is the patrol zone does is it allows you to connect the creatures in play to the off the board systems of the game. So, for example, there is a slot in the patrol zone that says, if a creature in this slot dies, you draw a card. If a creature in this other slot dies, you gain 1 gold, which is mana, right? And I find that you can compare that to Magic the Gathering in your head, right? Like in Magic, once a creature is in play, unless it has a special rule on its card, it's in play and it's no longer connected to those systems. You paid the costs in cards and mana, and it's done. It's now decoupled. Whereas in Codex, those systems remain connected. Right now, creatures in play are worth cards depending on the interactions between them. That's one type of coupling. And again, it makes the decisions more ambiguous. I want to kill this guy's big, strong unit because it's a real threat to me. But he gets to draw a card, and he's down to only 3. So maybe it's better for me to leverage the fact that he doesn't have cards than it is to take this threat off the board, right? It adds ambiguity. That's one example.
I also want to give one really like elemental example of coupling, which is in an FPS, because I'm trying to think of examples of coupling in video games. In an FPS, your position, the cone of view that you are able to see, and the bullets that you're able to, like, you know, I guess like the, what would you call it, like the hit scan or the line that you're able to project in terms of like damage for bullets or whatever, is all connected to your position. So as you move, it is coupling the like damage systems, the vision systems, and your own position. That's like a really elemental version of coupling that I almost feel like we wouldn't think of as coupling, but I think it technically is, because, you know, I want to dodge this bullet, but I also want to keep that guy in view. Right? So like there's that inherent push or pull. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I want to be looking all around me at all times so nobody flanks me. But
Yes.
I also want to be looking at this guy so I can shoot him.
Yeah.
I think sometimes coupling can be tricky to define, not because it's hard to see the connections, but sometimes it's hard to define where the boundaries are between systems.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the two things that you just listed, actually, looking all around me and looking just at the guy, that's all just one system. But I'm saying that the looking
because
is,
you have a threat direction like attached to your camera, because your ability to deal damage is coupled to your ability to see the world.
yes,
you have this conflict and ambiguity that emerges.
right. Right. And then movement also moves the camera. It moves your hitbox that you can be damaged from. And so there's some coupling there. But I mean, and obviously you have that level of coupling in like literally Space War from like 1979 or whatever, you know? So where your position and your source of your bullets, where your bullets are coming out of, are coupled together. So that's a very elemental version of coupling. But let's try to think of some more examples in video game world.
So actually, let's use that as a base.
Okay.
And I would have like a few questions kind of regarding, would something be more or less coupled, I guess. So in most FPSs, you have a player that has like a specific location, and there's a lot of, you know, information, you know, I guess coupled to that, such as like what they can see, right? Would a system where, you know, your vision could be coupled to more than one thing, would that be a more or less coupled system? Or
I can give you an example from existing FPSs of something that works like that.
like
in some
Rainbow Six
FPS
Siege,
games.
or with like the cameras, or
Well,
or
in some FPS games, your vision is coupled to your health, right? So if you're on very low health, you get vignetting. Your vision, like things you can see, your vision gets more dim, right? And the edges of your vision go dark. Maybe the screen goes gray, or that starts to shake, and it's like, that's coupling, right? That's the mechanic of vision being coupled to the mechanic of health.
The Doom 2 Archvile also comes to mind. I don't know if people have played Doom 2, but there's a monster that they start casting when they see you, and it takes about 3 seconds, and then if they're still within if they still have a line of sight to you at the end of their casting, channeling, then they do the damage to you and knock you up. So like that's another example of like a very direct use of the line of sight mechanism, sort of interacting with another system.
Okay.
But I forget what your original question was, though, or if it was answered there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was kind of asking, like, in the specific example about like Rainbow Six Siege, where you can, you know, you have your vision, which is in most FPSs is directly where your player is, but you know, you have cameras where, like, maybe that's not the best example. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, if you have more interconnectedness between different systems, is that the essence of what coupling is, or is that something else?
Yeah, that's pretty much it, in my view.
Well, that's the essence of more coupling, but like, you know, you can have a low amount of coupling and it's still coupling, right? Like, if I understood your question properly,
yeah,
like
it's not a binary condition. You have coupling or don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think there are different categories of it, such as, for example, we talked about the spatial relationship and how that's a very basic, very common form of coupling. I also describe that sometimes as being very rich because it's coupled in multiple ways to multiple systems. Like, as soon as you put something into the world in a spatial position, right? As soon as you give something position, it's coupled to, well, everything else that has
And it's
spatial
spatial,
position, and
exactly.
also all of the other systems of your game because they probably all interact with the movement system in some way. It's very dense, which is why the maxim "put it on the grid" that we talk about constantly is so useful and has so much utility, because what you're saying really is throw it on the grid and it will instantly have a
Couple it.
bunch of coupling and become
Exactly.
very ambiguous.
Yeah. And it's also just like a type of complexity that, we're just able to handle, as opposed to a lot of more abstract stuff which we didn't really evolve to understand as well. Whereas with space, it's just like obvious to us.
There's a visual component to the grid that makes it very easy for people to kind of like loosely heuristically grok, like,
Yep.
oh, I'm not going to count the number of spaces that guy is away from me, but like I sort of can feel it in the way that I couldn't necessarily if this was just numeric or abstract in some other way, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You can put a lot of coupling and by extension a lot of complexity into spatial relationships, and people can just handle it. It's very good.
Yeah, can handle a lot of coupling. Yeah, for sure. Whereas it becomes, as you said, like you can get in that situation where there's too much coupling, or it feels like oppressive, like just too much to think about, too brain burny. If too much stuff is going on in systems that aren't easily visualize, and therefore kind of like soft grok. Yeah, that sounds right to me. And so yeah, more examples. I'm kind of curious to think of more examples in the video game world of like explicit sort of coupling, because I do feel like there's not a ton of them. One that comes to mind for me, this is a little bit of an obscure reference, but Half-Life 2 Deathmatch, or I guess you could just say Half-Life 2, the gravity gun, being able to pick up a table or any kind of large object with the gravity gun, and that's a object that blocks sight, it blocks movement, etc., etc. You can then pick it up, it can like block bullets and damage. You can then like also throw it, so it's interacting with all these different systems because of the presence of the gravity gun. Otherwise, it would just be like just a brush, like a big obstacle, and not do nearly as many things.
Yeah, physics like spatial relationships are inherently highly coupled, right? Which again is why we often talk about add a ball.
Right. Well, yeah, and you could say that physics is sort of just an extension of the spatial relationships, right? Like it's just another thing in the spatial relationships.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of rules that are layered on top of spatial relationships. It's how do things move? Like, okay,
right.
Here's physics.
Yeah, like in a turn-based game, you could say turn-based games, all of them have their own physics, which is just the rules of how actors move around in this space, right? Like they can move diagonally, or they can't move diagonally, or they can move 2 tiles in a turn, or they can whatever it is. Like there's a physics to checkers, draughts or whatever. There's like things can jump over each other, or they can just move 1 tile. Like you could say that there is a physics to these games, but in all cases, the player is very easily able to grasp those physics and kind of easily you can add more complexity to it without it becoming oppressive in the way that some other systems might be.
Mm-hmm.
Should we talk to Bricks about webbing now?
Sure,
I'm down.
we can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like webbing is probably a subset of coupling, or at the very least, they're related. So I kind of break it up into input and output webbing, and output webbing is really what I'm more interested in. Input webbing is more of so let me back up. You have inputs and outputs. Inputs could just be like literally the player inputting a button press or something, but it could also just be if A then B. So if A then B, A would be the input, B would be the output. So if explosive barrel takes damage, then it explodes or whatever.
If you tap this card, you gain 1 mana.
Exactly, yeah. So input webbing is when you have more than one input that can lead to the same output. And then output webbing is when one or more inputs will lead to more than one output necessarily. It's not like it can lead to one or both. It will lead to at least like 2, but it could also be 3 or 4 or 5 or however many. So this is output webbing is really what interests me a lot. I think that's a
Wait, can you say what the definition of output webbing is
sure.
again?
Basically it's like you have one input and it will have multiple outputs. The most simple common example of this in games is resource systems. Say you have mana and you have your attack, right? And it costs 3 mana to do. There's 2 outputs. There's the actual action that happens, but also uses mana. You can't do the action without using the mana, right?
Okay.
This is like the most simple form of output webbing, in my opinion, probably.
So wait,
but
so that's so what's input webbing then?
that's when you can have multiple. So let's take the explosive barrel for example. Say it had different ways that it could explode. So one is it takes damage, and another is it's near fire or something. But I mean, this isn't a great example, but like.
Can we do the? Let me try this.
Sure.
The easiest example of a non-webbed thing is tapping a magic card. You tap the card, you gain 1 mana. 1 input, an action, right, goes in.
Right.
You spend the action to tap it, you tap it. 1 output, gain 1 mana. Input webbing is also if this card dies, you gain a mana. Also if some other thing, you gain a mana. Also if a fourth thing, all these different inputs, but they all lead to the same effect, which is you gain 1 mana. Whereas output webbing is I tap this card and I gain a mana and I do 1 damage to target creature and the third thing and the card dies.
Sure.
Okay. That makes sense, I think. Yeah, the crouch mode said this needs an actually good name, and the word webbing feels like the wrong word for this. Like I feel like it's almost more like branching maybe or something, because like to me webbing sounds more actually like a good word for coupling. Because like webbing sounds like you have this interconnected, systemic thing. Whereas this, I see this as like a simple, or not necessarily simple, but like, everything is. Also, by the way, do you agree with the way that Steven worded this? Input webbing is multiple inputs lead to a single output. Output webbing is when there are more outputs than inputs.
Yeah, I mean you can actually combine them. So you could have a scenario where you have like 3 different inputs lead to the 4 different outputs, or you could have like some. You can also have like sort of like a variable webbing, but that's more like a semantic thing.
Okay.
It's more like a framework, I think, for thinking about it in design. But yeah, I'm going to ignore that because it's not too important.
But before we get further into this, I do have a quick question. Like,
yeah,
why? What makes this an important or useful bit of theory? Like, how? Like, do we have a prescription for this, or like, how would you use this?
Yeah. So, I'm not sure about the input webbing so far. Like, if that's really a good or bad thing. In terms of output webbing, I do think that, if I would prescribe this for a strategy game, it would be to use it, and do it in such a way that you have like very different axes on the outputs, because I think it does like that alone. So the alternative to like output webbing is not output webbing, let's say, and it kind of comes down to what is the term? opportunity cost. So like, say you can't do every action at the same time.
Right.
This isn't like there are very few games where you could do every action at the same time.
Sure.
So whether that's like, oh, you only have so many resources, or you have cards, you can only choose one card or whatever. So when you only have that, like, I think that's good. I think opportunity cost is definitely good, where you want to like have like you want to make choices based on like, well, which of my options is the best. If all of those options don't have any like, not side effects. I mean, that kind of is a term, like, I mean, that's kind of the same idea
Second
of
order
like,
effects.
Yeah, I see what you're talking about here, I think, right? If you have a whole bunch of options and the only differentiator is like the output, a single output, right? They all do damage, but they have no other differences, right? They all cost one card and do damage. You do the one that does the most damage.
basically, yeah.
Whereas if they have a bunch of webbed outputs, you have potential for ambiguity there.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? It doesn't. They have to be the right webbed output. I like when you said they have to be as different as possible in their outputs, right? Because that creates incomparables. If it's like, oh, this is webbed because the output is 5 damage, but also I take 2 damage, then it's like it's still really easy to go, okay, I net positive 3 damage, so
Yeah.
it's like it's still easy to compare. But if it's the output is 5 damage and also I move back 1 space, like, well, what's the value of moving back 1 space relative to now you have ambiguity, now you have incomparables.
And I think what can be really good about this is the example of like, dealing damage and movement, for example. Maybe in some cases you actually want to move. In other cases, it's kind of bad for you to move, but it's like a question of, is it worth the damage, or whatever. Like, when you have these different axes, it's trying to like get them to line up in your favor.
So yeah, this is sort of the same stuff we were just talking about with coupling, and so that's kind of where I am. Is like, if I have coupling as a concept, let's remove, like, grant that we have this and we understand this, like, then what is the utility of this also? Like, you know what I mean? Because like, it seems like it is just like we started off saying, like, it's a subset of coupling. It's a type of coupling, I guess, right?
Brick said it was a subset of coupling. I think that is broadly correct. The way I understand, we all seem to understand it that way. I think its utility is it refers specifically to player actions. This is the way of when I start talking about coupling and people go, okay, but what do I actually do?
Yeah.
How should I change my design? What does a coupled rule look like? You can say to them like, okay, well, think about your basic actions, your basic inputs, right? On how many axes do they have effect? Like, how many different systems do they affect? What are their, like, do they have multiple outputs? This is a way of implementing coupling, and I think very useful, like as a like tool in the designer's toolbox.
Nice, yeah, and I also think actually the thing about this input and output webbing, like, I do think all games probably need both of these things in some situations. Like, for example, maybe there's like multiple ways to destroy a tower or something like that. Like, I don't think that either of these things is necessarily good or bad, but when it comes to prescriptions, I would say that video games lack output webbing, right? That's something that we would like to see video games do more of.
There are a lot of games with lots of input webbing when I think about the what Tribound would call sim plays. Stuff like Deus Ex, right? Where it's like, I need to get through this locked door. And there are a million ways to get through that locked door.
Oh, yeah. Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would like to see output webbing pushed further. I don't think it's definitely non-existent. It exists in ways that I definitely think are kind of like an afterthought, or like not really the exact, like, I don't think they were designed with that in mind. It was just kind of designed in a way that like that happened to come about, and it doesn't always work the best. But like again, like probably the most common simple form of output webbing would be resource systems, which is in so many games.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it's funny because like this when I before I'm trying to remember if I even like thought much about coupling before I was thinking about this. Because when I was thinking about webbing, before I even had a term for it, I was thinking about like more of like multi-purpose mechanics and like looking at a whole bunch of examples from games, and they were all like a little bit different. And I was like kind of had a gut feeling that there's something related about them, but I wasn't sure what. And eventually I kind of like came to this, you know, framework where I could kind of like analyze it. And now it's funny because now I can play a game and I'm like, oh, there's output webbing or whatever. And I like in the game I'm working on right now, I mean a lot of the decisions I'm making in terms of the design, like I'm applying output webbing to it to some degree, or just like thinking if there's ways to apply it. And yeah, most of what I've been thinking about is more about output webbing. I haven't thought too much about input webbing and like what the I don't really have any prescriptions regarding input webbing at this point in time.
Well, one thing that the Crouch Mode brought up in chat was that it destroys history, or the way I would say it is game state, right? Like it sort of collapses a bunch of different things into one outcome. And so that's not necessarily bad. Like you sometimes you do want to do that even in strategy games. And so like there's the upside of input webbing. What I would say is the upside of input webbing is that it simplifies, which sometimes you want to do. And the upside of output webbing is it sort of complexifies, which you also sometimes want to do. So
I suppose ultimately all of the inputs into the game will eventually web down to one output, which is, did you win?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, and that, I mean, us who are of the binary win state persuasion certainly would prescribe that. But yeah, I mean, I guess you could say there are some win states that are sort of output webbed in that they have like a weird, like a scoring system or some kind of ranked system, or, I'm just trying to think through some examples of games with that as a thing. But for most strategy games, I think, that's a good example there of like you probably want the final outcome to be input webbed. I still do feel like maybe there's a better word for it, because like it doesn't sound like the thing that it does for some reason to me.
Yeah, I mean the reason I
it's like
just called it
unwebbing.
that,
Input webbing is like unwebbing it, right? It's like collapsing it, almost, right? It's like input unwebbing, or collapsing, or something like that. Whereas this, I mean, branching is the first word that came to mind for me for output webbing. But those are just some synonyms at the very least.
Yeah.
RFG Pfeiffer says Markov blanket / Markow property. That sounds like some stuff I don't know about. Right there. For sure. Big time stuff I don't know about. Yeah, cool. Any other thoughts or questions or examples you want to give or anything like that?
I had a question for you.
Sure.
Keith. Assuming that we think coupling and by extension webbing are good things and we like them and we are being prescriptive about them and saying try to do more of this in your games, do you think off the top of your head there is space for where could you add some coupling to Gem Wizard's tactics that it would be beneficial, do you think?
Well, I would like to do more coupling with like, like maybe like when characters level up, maybe that's kind of uncoupled, or like the stats system maybe could be more coupled. I mean, you do want it, like, first of all, I would say Gem Wizards is pretty coupled compared to most video games, and that actually is maybe a good example of a game where adding a lot more coupling, I don't know would make it a better game. Maybe a little bit. There's some areas where more coupling would be good, but I think Gem Wizards is, actually, frankly, like it might be better with a little bit less coupling in some areas because coupling has a cost, and I do think that a lot of players who play Gem Wizards are just like, okay, what? Like I have to like, it's a little bit overwhelming sometimes partially because things are so coupled. But I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if other people have ideas. I mean, it's hard for me to answer this because I'm, like knee deep in Gem Wizards changes all the time and looking for more ways to couple. So like already I've implemented lots of different new things. I was trying to think of some examples recently that I've implemented. But if people have thoughts or suggestions or anything like that.
Oh, you did the rocket jump ability last night, which I think is highly webbed, right? It's a single input of the action and the cooldown, and the output is movement, fire. He leaps, so he's covering over the top of people, which means it's connected to the spatial system.
Yep. Yeah, it also can bounce. It can like there's a bunch of things. Yeah, I mean there's things like that's the thing is the game is crazy coupled already. Like something like you can drill for oil, and then the oil you can slide over the oil if the oil can light on fire, or the oil can be collected into this other resource system. Like it's if anything it's might be a little bit too coupled, and that's because I'm like sort of furiously like designing like in a reaction maybe to what I see video games issues as being, like looking at a game like Advance Wars. I mean it has a grid, so there is more coupling than a lot of games, but other than that it's very it's actually very input webby, I guess you would say, and that like yes, there's all these positions and stuff, and there's some terrain types and things like that, but it just kind of comes down to just deal the damage and bring their health to 0 and they disappear, and that's it. And there's a little more going on, obviously, but like, I to me, Advance Wars, one of the reasons I wanted to make Gem Wizards is because I felt like Advance Wars doesn't have enough coupling. Or XCOM, if you like. The crouch mode says each faction's wizard should have a land ability that changes depending on the terrain it stands on. That would be an example of coupling, but that would be also an example of coupling that I wouldn't suggest because it's like now it's very stressful just to move your wizard. You know what I mean? So these are actually some good examples of too much coupling. Add to defense for every hex to the east. That's a great example of terrible coupling. That would be like just a nightmare to play with. Add to attack.
I don't like that one. I do like the terrain one. Though it's worth saying that I'm a player who has no upper limit for coupling.
There is definitely a personal thing there. Like there, some people, yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I'm more of like a from the hip kind of player. There are definitely a lot of people who, I think my games tend to appeal to people that are like more, calculating and have a very high tolerance for like extreme levels of coupling, which kind of makes sense. But I think the typical game player's tolerance or, like appetite or just like level of comfort with coupling is pretty low because they're used to playing games that have pretty low coupling. Bro likes, this is our RFG Pfeiffer says, bro likes have a lot of just this type of weird coupling that makes it impossible to think 2 moves ahead. Yeah, some coupling just doesn't intuitively work and feels very arbitrary. I think we've seen this in some board games too sometimes where it's like, actually I was just playing Summoner Wars. Here's a good example. I was just playing Summoner Wars 2 the other day on stream, and there is a new rule where if you don't attack with any of your guys on a turn, your champion takes 1 damage. And it's like, thematically, flavor-wise, that's kind of bad for sure. But and it's like very obviously there just to like prevent turtling. But it also is hard to remember because it's like not natural. It's like there's no thematic or like, affordance ties there to like help us understand that would be the case. So that to me is maybe a good example of like bad coupling, sort of. Or I don't know, maybe it's better for the game overall, but there are costs there.
Yeah, I don't play Summon of Wars, but like immediately that's awkward, right? It's
Yeah.
an awkward mechanic. They've fudged that in, and I do think it's good to fudge in rules like that if you have a problem, because the alternative is not dealing with the problem. But you can immediately, you know, good design is elegant, and that is inelegant.
Yeah, and also it's a local maxima solution, right? Like there might be, it's like, yeah, based on all of the conditions that we have here, this solves the problem. But maybe we could like, dig a bunch of stuff up and get to the where is this problem coming from and actually solve it in a more holistic way, which is extremely expensive, might mean starting your game design all over, and like is not practical a lot of the time.
I keep thinking about imagining Dave Selden playing Summoner Wars, and I know exactly what he would do. He would like set up something where he got one like the cheapest possible unit every turn, and then he would defend with all of his units because he's turtling. But he would attack with just that one unit that he didn't care about, and it's like, oh yeah, he died. Oh well. And then he'd get it again the next turn, and he'd be like, okay, why am this is within the spirit of the rules. No, sorry, this is within the letter of the rules,
Right.
and I win. And it's like, yeah, that's what a competitively minded player would do with that rule. You just play as close as possible to the rule.
Yeah, because the rest of the system is telling you to turtle, clearly. Like, that there's something about the way that the system is built. I'm not saying this from a position of actually know what I'm talking about. I'm not a high level player, but clearly there's something about the game that's making people want to turtle. And so the non-holistic solution is, yeah, you just take 1 damage if you're turtling. Whereas the more, there would be, I have no idea what it is, but there would be some other solution that would be actually a more systemic, holistic answer to that.
Yeah, there needs to be some other incentive to attack, right? There's clearly some incentive to do nothing in their current system. And I presume what players will do in this system is do nothing until their champion has 1 health. It's like, oh yeah, I take 1 damage a turn. Okay. I'm going to keep waiting until I draw the card that makes me win. All right, now I have 1 health and I have to do something. It's like, cool, instead of games lasting forever, now they last 20 turns of nothing happening. You've fixed it.
Yeah. And there's some issues there with health, and I mean I've had issues with health over the years on the grounds of coupling, in that health tends to not be terribly coupled to other systems, and your example there kind of highlights that, because until you are like, if you start with 20 health, those first 19 points of health, you don't really care about them. They don't really matter. It's really just as long as you know you can hold on to that last point. Where the rest of them are doesn't matter, because they're not coupled to anything else. And that's something that's always bugged me about health systems in games. And simultaneously, it's also something I've always loved about Puzzle Strike, which has a much more dynamic system. It doesn't have health. It has something that's like sort of health-ish like, but it's caught the gem pile, which is interacting with many other systems at all times. It matters completely where your gem pile is at any point. And so like my feeling is like, man, couldn't we get some new things, not the Puzzle Strike gem pile, but new things like that are more coupled to other systems. And in video games, it feels like so alien to propose anything other than health.
Yeah, another reason that Smash Brothers is so good, right?
Yes.
Health in Smash Brothers is coupled to the physics system, and it works really nicely, and it's very yeah, it's elegant and leads to like a lot of emergent complexity in the game.
Totally. That's a great example of coupling. You hit someone, it knocks them back, but it also increases their damage percentage. And going back to webbing, this would be an output webbing thing, where yeah. And then I also want to think about, real quick, do you guys remember PlayStation All Stars?
Yes.
So
it's like Smash.
Well, it was kind of like Smash, but they forgot, there was some, I'm now forgetting what it was, but they like forgot some really important component of Smash Brothers, like, oh, there's like no ringing out, so it became like a health bar again or something like that. I forget. So the crouch mode says, in practice, isn't Smash damage percent just like health? And I would say in practice, it's more like health than I would have liked. because they don't use the positionality as much as I would have liked. So to me, the Smash Brothers damage percentage is more of a promise than actually something delivered. But you could imagine a system where the position, where your position on the stage, you know, sort of like multiplied by your damage percentage equals this weird thing.
In practice, I think the better you are at Smash, the more Smash percentage is like health. Because for a really good player, it's like, okay, this lightweight character is at 69% damage. The next time I hit them, they're dead. You have 1 hit point, because the next time someone hits you, you're getting meteor smashed off the stage. And it's, for a good player, that's more and more true. Whereas for a worse player, it becomes like the same combo you would do pushes them a certain distance off the stage, and okay, now they're in much more danger. But it's not quite the same thing as this binary, like, well, do you have enough Smash for me to kill you? Okay, then you're dead.
Right.
It's much more, I'm not quite sure the word is, ambiguous, vague, continuous than it is discrete. But that's, you know, a lot of games dissolve when you get really good at them.
So yeah, the crouch mode reminds me that you had to build up this meter in PlayStation All Stars. So yeah, hitting people, it was just adding to your meter. So it was kind of like a health bar, and then you would do this super move that would just kill them once your meter was full. So like I remember being like baffled by that game because like I felt like they somehow like completely didn't get the point of Smash Brothers at all. Like they just thought, oh, there's like famous characters like bouncing around and hitting each other, and but yeah, so in that it actually is back to more of a regular health. It's basically just totally a health system with like a execute move, which maybe is an improvement from traditional health. I'm not sure really, but yeah. Yeah,
it's probably worse than traditional health. I don't want to go into a big diversion, but like I can talk about why it's probably worse.
But yeah, go for it. Got another 5 minutes or so.
You build up a whole bunch of state as you're dealing damage and reducing the opponent's health, and then you miss your big move, and they're still on no health, and the state is the same. You build up a bunch of state while you're building meter and reducing the opponent's health. You miss your critical move. Okay, we've just reset the whole game state. I have to start over. Right. Like everything's on this coin flip of will I hit?
Yeah.
Huge output randomness there.
True. Yeah, I have also a problem with Smash Brothers in the lives system or the stock system, because I feel like that's kind of state resetty too. That's another one of these. Stock in Smash Brothers is very strong input webbing, I would say, right? Because like you have all this position and everything, and you know the damage that you have. I mean, those are the two main things: the damage percentage you have and your position on the stage. Then you die, and you kind of just like get resetted to the starting condition. Granted, with 1 fewer lives, but lives, I guess, you know, maybe lives, the stock thing, I have the same objection to it as I do health. It only really matters when you have that when you lose the last one, right? And other than that, it's just deleting a bunch of state and like sort of starting you over. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have, I'm working on a theory right now about state resets being good, but maybe we can talk about that a different time.
That sounds great. Yeah. Bricks, do you have any other thoughts before we close up?
Not particularly. Actually, one thing I thought a little bit about that I would like to see more of is, because we talked about health a little bit, is games that just treat health more as a resource rather than like just a buffer of like, oh, this is how much you can screw up, and that's all it is. Like, I'd like to see more stuff done with that, but yeah, I don't know. We can move on, or I don't know what else you want to talk about.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I like to think that in Oro, actually, that health is kind of a resource that you spend because of the pretty deterministic way that things work. You're like, okay, I'm going to move forward. I know I need this many more points. I think I can spend this 1 health to do blankety blankety blank. I'm not exactly sure why health feels that way in Oro and doesn't in a lot of other games. In a lot of other games, it does feel like it's just it's like a mess up meter, right? Like you have this many mess ups allowed, and in Oro, like it can be that way, but when you're playing very intentionally, it's like you usually are like trading health because you don't get anything for ending the game with 7 health. You don't need all 7 health, right? Like so you just you spend them basically.
Mm-hmm.
I could see why resets would be good. I have a vision of why I think there it's honestly I don't think that's I mean I don't know where Steven's gonna go with it exactly, but in the same way that we started out saying that input webbing is not bad, it's collapsing things down, and sometimes you do want to do that. Like sometimes that is really a good thing to do. I've been noticing that more and more the more I make these like weird, very complicated games that are sort of hard to dive into. Simplicity, like there is something to simplicity. I think video games are too simple, but there's something to it that is very valuable also, I guess. And I don't know if that's where you're going with that, Steven, but I look forward to your article.
Yeah, I haven't quite figured it out. I'm still thinking about it in my head. It was kind of triggered by the new Soren Johnson game, and it just keeps expanding stuff after manifold stuff, and I keep wishing that it would just like, can some of these arcs just end? Because like half of the arcs I'm dealing with right now, gameplay arcs, just stop so that I can like take a breath, because every turn is just relentless.
Yeah.
And I was thinking like, maybe if it reset the state a little, like there are games that just go like, they can't get a kind of natural rhythm out of their occasional resets where it's like, not the whole state resets, but just like, like you get knocked down in Street Fighter and there's a little bit of tension there, and then you just get up and it's like, okay, but it resolved and it was fine. It was fine. It was an arc that had a beginning and an end, and it wasn't the whole game, and it's fine.
Yeah, I think rhythm, that's a good word for that. Is that
yes.
Absolutely, yeah. That's another thing, that if you're just like hunting for, more and more coupling, which again is not a problem video game designs have at all, except for like, like people like us. But if you are doing that, you can end up in this situation where the game lacks a rhythm, and it just feels like all on all the time, there's all these arcs, everything's too interconnected. Actually, that's Soren Johnson game, that's a good, I haven't played it yet still, but from seeing you play it a little bit, that seems like that might be a good example of that. And I think he took that because or he took a lot of cues from Crusader Kings, which has a lot of systems and a lot of like long-term systems. I don't know that Crusader Kings is, would you say Crusader Kings is like super coupled? I guess it's like pretty coupled. Like there's a lot, just because there's so many.
Weirdly not. It has more coupling like as in absolute terms than most games you would play, because it just has so many systems and some of them are connected, right? But in relative terms, it's weirdly disconnected, because it's like, most of these systems are connected to one other system, but you've got 400 systems, right? If you had the same number of connections in something like Gem Wizards, that's high coupling.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So I mean, if anything, like to answer your question also about Gem Wizards, I'm also sort of thinking about places to implement more input webbing, I guess you would say. Recently I tried to do that a little bit with, when you capture a tower, it gives your whole team a heal. Like right now I think it's like 3 hit points, which kind of has, it does have a little bit of state deletion in that, like, so a lot of times your units will just reset up to their max health. But that's kind of good. And also, like, it deletes the tower. It's like, there's just like one thing I don't have to worry about now. And also it's a victory point. That's another thing we didn't talk about, but like victory points are also kind of like health. They're kind of one of these things that's like outside the system. You get this victory point, and then it's like victory points do not connect to anything else almost ever. And that, on one hand, you could be like, well, that sucks, you know, because like they're not coupled. On the other hand, it's kind of nice to just like be like, okay, I have 5 victory points. I know that at least, right? And like I can just move on to the next thing. So there's, you know, like everything else, there's a balance, I think, and that's where game design gets hard.
Yeah, I think we can probably stop. I've run out of things to say about coupling. I think the main takeaway is, yes, there's such a thing as too much, but that is a problem we would very much like to have.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thanks both of you, Steven, Bricksparts, and I'm looking forward to your article on or any new stuff either of you guys work on. Keep me posted, and yeah, I guess we'll wrap it up.
Thanks a lot, guys. It was great talking to you. See you later.
Right.
You too.
See ya.
All right. Well, that was Steven and Bricksparts. Thanks for watching, everybody. So yeah, we can spend a little time in the chat now if anyone has any more thoughts. I'm gonna like share this document and everything. But yeah, do you guys have any last thoughts or questions? Let's see. If Tribound is saying, let me go up, scroll up, and catch up on the chat here. Floppagist says, for example, in Smash, when you're low percent, you have the option to crouch, cancel a hit, and counterattack. Yeah, so it does matter. For sure. In the Water says resets feel good for execution-based games, especially for spectators. Probably less good for pure strategy. Yeah, I mean, there is the spectator type of thing, type of value that is distinct, I think, maybe from the value for the player, but maybe not as distinct as we might think. Like, the player also needs those kinds of big, simple, flat clues, I guess. You're allowed to collapse some state, the crouch mode says, which I agree. Pfeiffer says resets in sim plays allow you to design content independently. Yeah, now that's a big one. That's a whole nother podcast episode right there. Resets allowing you to design content independently. That's something we definitely should have talked about more. I'm going to get back to that, but I'm going to catch up on chat real quick, and then I'm going to come back to that. Resets often reduces calculation. Yes. No need to calculate past the reset. Exactly. VP is an example of why you don't want to couple everything. You want players to build heuristics, which is also why HP coupling usually doesn't work. Heuristics are overrated. Damn, TB is right. I should have said this. This is Steven saying this. Concern I have about coupling is that it can, if poorly used, make the game less ambiguous and more solvable. I could see that. Bricksparts says, negative feedback loop / input webbing is basically a necessity for sim plays. Yeah, so sim plays is a whole nother animal. Maybe Tribound can come and talk about that at some point, or anyone else that wants to. Steven says, though I think that's mostly theoretical. I haven't seen it much in practice. Right, because like again, we're living in the world of not enough coupling in video games anyways. So yeah, I want to come back to this concept of resets in sim plays. Well, not just in sim plays. That's the big point. Let me just make another thing here. Yeah, because this is not just a thing for sim plays. Text format. How do I clear formatting? This is like the, you know, capitalismo thing where, you know, we live in a world where games are sold. They're commodified products. And so resets actually have a relationship to the way that content resets have a relationship to content. Kind of another topic we've talked about a little bit more in the past. When things are lightly coupled, in the same way that for programming, as Steven was saying, in programming, you kind of want things to be like modular and independent in some way. And also when you're selling a bunch of products, when you're selling booster packs or whatever it is, you also kind of want that same thing. Like and I've been trying to get this across. Like for MTG or a CCG, let's say, CCGs do not want a lot of coupling. And that is really for like a marketing or maybe like a business reason more than a game design reason. And this is an extreme example of that. And let's actually, an even more extreme example would be the gacha games. They want everything to be as modular as possible so that they can create as much stuff as they can. The more coupled a system is, the harder it is to make new content for it. This is something I've been trying to like say for a very long time, and I feel that I've fought with some people about this over the years. There's a little tiny gnat flying around. It's annoying. Let's catch up on chat one more time here. But like, imagine it, Steven says, but like, imagine the coupling you added to Puzzle Strike 2nd edition was you get more money when you combine. Right. That would be like an example of bad coupling. Video games don't need coupling. Well, or actually, you might not even say it's bad coupling. It's just a bad rule. Video games don't need coupling because they aren't strategy games. Some of them are. How can you say they're all not strategy games? Certainly some of them are. Okay, now the game's even more about the purples. Yeah. RFG Pfeiffer says you put med kits at the end of the room because you don't know what the next guy puts in the next room. Oh, that's funny. I feel like that's a continuation of something else. That became regenerating health and shields in the 2000s. Right, yeah, just resetting the state all the time because it's actually, you know what it's also kind of, that reminds me of a little bit, is like sitcom writing, right? Like where everything has to kind of return to the normal state for the next episode. So that, I mean, there's very practical reasons for that. So like the next writer that comes in like doesn't have to like know what all the specific plot things that are happening. And so they can just crank out, like you can make infinite numbers of a sitcom episode, basically. Infinite numbers of sitcom episodes, I meant to say. Making the game more coupled, making it harder to solve, but making it harder to solve also makes it harder to make. Yes. Yeah, and that's also bad for Capitalismo. They don't want something that's hard to make and that might like be all busted and weird. And strategy games are by definition not video games. They might be digital games. Oh, okay. You got me. I mean, they have video in them, right? So unless for me, I think the only video game is what's it called? The Dragon's Lair. Anything that uses full motion video, those are the only real video games. Night Trap, you know, Sewer Shark. Other than that, they're not video games. You made it harder for the player to understand, but also harder for the designer to understand. That's a really good point too about increased coupling. So like a downside of increased coupling. I kind of want to clean this up and put it all together into like one nice little thing. And I'll credit both of you and everyone else who's helped out with this. But yeah, I think this is a good like almost like a glossary entry. That would be really good to have. What else? Don't know any of those video games because I'm not old. Well, then you don't know any video games. Sorry to hear that. Oh, contradiction was a full motion video. Oh, this is not useful with too much lag. No, I read your contradiction. I just didn't know that was the name of a game. There isn't that much lag, actually. I'm just behind. To a lesser extent, waves of enemies. You fight one wave, then pause, then another wave, then pause. Oh yeah, waves in a tower defense game. Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's a very easy, consistent way to do design, but it's also like shooting for very little. I feel like it's like, it's gonna work. Another one is like the puzzles, just like these, or puzzles a bad example, but like I guess like levels, stages, or which is kind of similar as like the waves in tower defense. Anyways, yeah, thanks everyone for coming by. I'm gonna wrap it up now. Please do give me your thoughts on, if you have thoughts on Gem Wizards and ways you think it should be more input webbed or output webbed. I would love to hear about your ideas for that. Because I'm still working on the game and adding things and changing things all the time. In fact, I just mailed out some things that there's a company that's going to be making the Switch version, so it's coming to Switch at some point in the next I don't know, 6 months probably, which is pretty exciting. But that also makes me want to, like, thinking of it as a console game, I'm like, I do want it to be, like video game acceptable enough, and not feel oppressive to play. So that's where the input webbing, I think, comes more into play. And yeah, that's about all I got to say on this topic. Thanks for hanging out, everybody, and I'll see you in the Discord. See you next time.